He scratched at his wedding ring during every lie. I noticed it in our third session, a small, almost imperceptible movement. His index finger would trace the band clockwise precisely 3 times whenever fiction replaced fact. Most people have tells. David Brennan's was elegant in its consistency. My wife and I are planning a trip to Italy, he said that October afternoon, his finger already moving. She's always wanted to see Rome. I wrote nothing in my notepad. I simply watched. 23 years in psychiatry teaches you that silence is a scalpel. It cuts through pretense, exposes the raw tissue beneath. David shifted in the leather chair, the same chair that had held murders, addicts, and broken marriages. The autumn light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his face. "Tell me about your wife," I said. His fingers stopped mid-rotation. "Sarah, what about her?" "You've mentioned her 12 times across our sessions, but you've never described her?" "Not really." The clock on my desk ticked. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent song. David's jaw tightened, a micro-expression that lasted perhaps half a second. But in that fragment of time, I saw something shift behind his eyes, something that looked like fear. "She's supportive," he managed, 3 scratches on the ring. "Always has been." I leaned back, maintaining eye contact. "Mr. Brennan, why did you come to see me?" We'd been dancing around this question for 5 weeks. He'd given me the standard answers: work stress, sleep problems, general anxiety. Insurance companies love these diagnoses. Vague enough to be believable, specific enough to bill. But David Brennan didn't have generalized anxiety. He had something much more specific. "I told you," he said, voice steady. "The pressure at work has been... You're an insurance broker. You've been doing the same job for 14 years. What changed 6 months ago?" His hand froze on the armrest, fingers half curled as if caught between movement and retreat. For the first time since we'd begun these sessions, David didn't bother hiding it. His composure cracked. The practiced calm, the neutral mass therapists are trained to read through, slipped just enough to reveal something raw beneath it. Genuine surprise, maybe even fear. People forget that therapists don't meet their patients blindly. Before the first chair is pulled out, before the first, "How are you feeling today?" we've already seen the outline of a life. Intake forms, employment histories, medication lists, dates, patterns, omissions. We don't just listen to stories, we study timelines. We notice when the handwriting tightens, when answers grow vague, when someone circles around a question instead of answering it. Long before the first word is spoken, the shape of the truth is already there. "How did you..." he started, then stopped, as if finishing the question might give it more power than he intended. His voice was quieter now, careful, measured. "Your intake paperwork," I said calmly, too calmly. "You didn't think much of it when you filled it out, but I did. You marked the onset of your symptoms as exactly 6 months ago, August 15th. I paused, letting the date hang between us. Not late summer, not around August, an exact day. I leaned back slightly, watching his jaw tighten. That's a very specific date for what you described as general stress. Stress doesn't usually announce itself with a timestamp. Trauma does. Something happened on August 15th, David, and whatever it was, I let the silence finish the sentence for me. The silence that followed was different, heavier. It had weight and texture, like something you could reach out and touch. David's breathing changed, shallower, faster. His pupils dilated slightly. The sympathetic nervous system doesn't lie, even when the person does. "Nothing happened that day," he said quietly. I waited. Nothing unusual. Another wait. It was a Tuesday. "What happened on that Tuesday, David?" He stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor, and crossed the room toward the window as if distance might protect him. He didn't look back. In the glass, his reflection hovered like a ghost, washed out, fragmented, more memory than man. The lines in his face seemed deeper there, distorted by the faint glare of fluorescent lights, haunted, unmoored. Outside, the hospital parking lot sprawled beneath us, a flat gray ocean of asphalt and exhaust. Cars drifted in and out like silent vessels. People moved between them with purpose, clutching briefcases, handbags, coffee cups, containers for ordinary lives and extraordinary secrets. They walked past one as sometimes the real illness isn't in the body at all. It's buried deeper. It lives in memory. in what we force ourselves to remember, and in what we work, Tyrell. My wife had a surgery scheduled. The words came slowly, as if each one had to be pulled up from somewhere dark and resistant. His voice was barely above a whisper, thin and fragile, like it might break if he raised it any minor procedure. He added quickly, defensively, outpatient. A pause, then, softer still, she was supposed to be... He pressed his forehead lightly against the glass, eyes fixed on the distant rows of cars, as though the truth might be waiting for him somewhere out there. And in that moment, I knew August 15th wasn't just a date on a form. It was the day everything went wrong. Past tense. The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't write it down. Some things are too important for notes. But she wasn't home by evening. David's shoulders sagged, the tension finally draining out of them as if his body had grown tired of holding itself together. For a brief, fragile moment, I thought this was it, that he might finally break, that the wall of carefully constructed explanations, half-truths stacked on omissions, lies polished smooth by repetition, would collapse under its own weight. I almost expected the truth to spill out of him uncontrollably, raw and violent, like blood rushing from an unseen wound. But it didn't happen. Instead, he drew in a slow breath and straightened, methodically reclaiming his posture. When he turned to face me, his expression had already begun to reset the way people do when they realize they've revealed too much. And then he smiled. It was the saddest smile I had ever seen, not because it was full of grief, but because it was empty of it. A smile practiced just enough to pass as reassurance, the kind that exists only to convince the person wearing it. She was home by 6, he said evenly, too evenly. Everything went perfectly. He gave a small, almost dismissive laugh, as if the moment before had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. I don't know why I said it like that, but his eyes betrayed him. They never quite met mine. They flickered, restless, searching for something solid to land on and finding nothing. People don't accidentally choose their words in moments like that. They reveal themselves, then panic, then retreat. And as he stood there, smiling that hollow smile, I realized something far more unsettling than a breakdown would have been. David wasn't ready to tell the truth yet. He was ready to bury it 3 scratches on the ring. I've learned that the human mind is a remarkable architect. It builds walls, constructs narratives, creates entire realities to protect itself from unbearable truth. David Brennan had been building for 6 months. Each session added another brick. Each lie reinforced the structure, but every wall has a weak point. Tell me about the phone call, I said. His face went white, actually white, the color draining so completely that for a moment I worried he might faint. His hand gripped the window frame, knuckles blanching. What phone call? The one you received at 4:47 p.m. on August 15th. I was guessing. Pure instinct based on years of reading microexpressions and behavioral patterns. But sometimes a guess lands with the force of certainty. David's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the chair, and for the first time in 5 weeks, he didn't touch his wedding ring at all. How could you possibly know about that? I didn't, I admitted, until just now. The confession seemed to liberate something in him. His eyes glistened, not quite tears, but the precursor to them. The dam holding back 6 months of carefully maintained fiction was beginning to crack. You have to understand, he began, voice shaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to do the right thing, for everyone. What happened in that phone call, David? He pressed his palms against his eyes, as if he could push the memory back into the darkness where he'd been keeping it. But memory doesn't work that way. It's patient. It waits. And eventually, it demands to be acknowledged. The surgeon called me, he said. Sarah's surgeon. He said there had been a complication, that I needed to come to the hospital immediately. Outside, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, smearing the sky with thick bands of amber and blood-red light. The colors bled into one another, beautiful and violent all at once. It was the kind of sunset people stop to photograph, never realizing how closely it can resemble an ending. I'd seen that sky before, at least in description. The same bruised hues that had hung over the city 6 months ago on the evening David Brennan's carefully ordered life first began to come apart. Some days don't announce their importance. They look ordinary right up until the moment they aren't. I drove 90 miles per hour through the city, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out faster now, stripped of polish. Ran 3 red lights, didn't care. His hands flexed at his sides, as if remembering the steering wheel beneath his palms. All I could think about was getting there before... He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet room. For a second, it seemed like the memory had risen too close to the surface, sharp enough to cut. Before it was too late! He finished, his voice rough, almost unrecognizable. I let the silence settle again, heavy and deliberate. Silence has weight in moments like these. It presses. It demands. Before what was too late, I asked gently. The question lingered between us, suspended like that burning sun outside, balanced on the edge of disappearance, waiting to fall. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the reflection of a man who had been drowning for half a year, a man who had convinced everyone around him, his colleagues, his friends, probably even himself, that everything was fine, that life continued normally, that the world still made sense. Before she woke up and told them what I'd done, the words fell between us like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything we had discussed in our previous sessions. Suddenly, the lies made a different kind of sense. The carefully maintained fiction wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about protecting a secret so devastating that acknowledging it would mean reconstructing his entire understanding of who he was. I glanced at the clock. Our session had run over by 15 minutes. Outside, the hospital corridors were quieting as the day shift transitioned to night. This was always my favorite time, when the building itself seemed to exhale, releasing the accumulated tension of another day spent battling against human suffering. We're out of time for today, I said gently, but I want you to think about something before our next session. David looked up, exhausted, as if the conversation had aged him years and minutes. The truth doesn't actually change, David. Not really. It exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The only thing that changes is how long we carry the weight of denying it. He nodded slowly, stood, and walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when he turned back. Dr. Moore, what if the truth is worse than the lie? I considered this. A question I'd been asked in various forms by hundreds of patients over 2 decades. People in crisis always believe their specific pain is unique, unprecedented. They never realize that human suffering, while infinite in its variations, follows surprisingly predictable patterns. The truth is what it is, I said. The lie is what kills you slowly from the inside. He left without another word. I sat in the gathering darkness of my office, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway. Then I picked up my recorder and spoke into it. Patient exhibits systematic deception across multiple sessions. Primary defense mechanism appears to be dissociation combined with elaborate constructed narrative. Breakthrough achieved in session 5. Patient revealed partial truth regarding traumatic event 6 months prior. Suspect deeper revelation pending. Continue building rapport. Patient demonstrating signs of readiness to confront core trauma. I clicked off the recorder and stared at the empty chair across from me. 23 years, and it still amazed me. The architectures of denial humans construct. The elaborate prisons we build to keep ourselves from facing what we've done, or what's been done to us. David Brennan would return next week. He would sit in that same chair and we would continue the excavation. Layer by layer, lie by lie, we would dig toward whatever truth lay buried beneath 6 months of fiction. But sitting there in the dimming light, I found myself wondering something I rarely allowed myself to consider. What would happen when we finally reached the bottom? What would we find waiting in the darkness of David Brennan's mind? And perhaps more importantly, would he survive the discovery? 7 days passed before David returned. I spent those days reviewing our recordings, listening to them late into the evening when the building had gone quiet and the corridors echoed with my own footsteps. I played his words back again and again, not for what he said, but for how he said it. The pauses, the revisions mid-sentence, the moments where his voice tightened or drifted just a fraction of a second too long. Patterns of deception aren't always loud. More often, they whisper. The human mind reveals itself in layers. It's like an archaeological dig, each stratum marking a different era, a different version of the story we tell ourselves. The surface layer is always the neatest. Rational explanations, socially acceptable narratives, carefully smoothed edges. Beneath that lie the cracks, and beneath those the buried truths, compressed by time, warped by pressure, preserved in strange, distorted forms. But unlike archaeology, psychiatry isn't about the past staying safely in the past. We aren't brushing dust off bones. We're excavating something that's still alive, something that reacts to being uncovered, something that resists, recoils, and sometimes lashes out. Every time I pressed play, it felt less like analysis and more like reopening a wound. The mind doesn't like to be exposed this way. It bleeds when you dig too deep. And as I listened to David's voice fill the empty room, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I was uncovering wasn't finished hurting him or me. When he walked into my office that following Tuesday, he looked different, thinner. The shadows under his eyes suggested sleep had become a stranger. He sat without being asked, and for the first time since our sessions began, he met my gaze directly. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, no preamble, no small talk, "about truth not changing." I waited, pen poised above my notepad. "You're wrong." The statement hung in the air between us. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling, silent, relentless, covering the city in white lies. "Tell me why I'm wrong." David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The wedding ring caught the light. No scratching. Not yet. Because truth is subjective. What I remember, what Sarah remembers, what actually happened. There are 3 different things. So, which one is the truth, Dr. Moore? It was a sophisticated defense mechanism, philosophical relativism as a shield against personal responsibility. I'd seen it before, usually in patients with advanced education or high intelligence. They intellectualize their pain, transform emotional wounds into abstract debates. What does Sarah remember? His jaw tightened. Nothing. She remembers nothing. From the surgery, from any of it. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, the same trajectory as last week, as if his body had memorized the choreography of avoidance. The anesthesia, the complication, what happened after, it's all just blank for her. I made a note. That's not uncommon with certain surgical complications. The brain protects itself. Protects itself, he repeated softly, almost laughing. Is that what we're calling it? The question felt loaded, not just curious, but dangerous, like touching a wire you suspect might still be live. I was acutely aware of the moment of how easily it could tip in either direction. We were close now, close to something neither of us could fully see yet, but both of us could feel. It was the same instinct sailors talk about, the subtle warning before the storm breaks. The sky still looks calm, the water still passable, but something in the air shifts. A pressure change, a heaviness that settles into the chest. The room seemed to respond in kind, growing smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. I measured my voice carefully. One wrong inflection could send him retreating back behind his defenses. "David," I said, deliberately grounding the moment in his name, "what happened when you arrived at the hospital?" The words hung there, suspended, not an accusation, not yet, just an opening. But even as I asked, I knew this was the threshold. Whatever waited on the other side of that question had been held back for 6 months by fear, denial, and carefully rehearsed lies. And once it crossed into the open, there would be no putting it back. Storms don't ask permission before they arrive. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. His breath fogged it, creating a small cloud that dissipated and reformed with each exhale, a visible manifestation of something trying to escape. They took me to a private room, not her room, a conference room, the kind they use when they have to tell family members that someone didn't make it. He paused. I thought she was dead. For 5 minutes, sitting in that room with the pastoral landscape paintings and the box of tissues, I thought my wife was dead. But she wasn't. No. He turned to face me. She wasn't. The surgeon came in, Dr. Patricia Chen, I'll never forget her name, and she told me Sarah was alive, stable. But there had been an error during the procedure. Error. Such a clinical word for what I suspected was coming. What kind of error? David's hand moved to his ring, 1 scratch, 2, 3. They said it was a miscommunication in the surgical team. The anesthesiologist and the surgeon weren't synchronized. Sarah woke up during the procedure. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I noted the significance. Intraoperative awareness, awakening during surgery, is a rare but devastating occurrence. Patients report feeling trapped, paralyzed, experiencing pain without the ability to signal distress. The psychological trauma can be severe. She felt the surgery? She felt everything. His voice cracked. For approximately 4 minutes, she was conscious and experiencing the full sensation of the procedure, but the paralytic was still active, so she couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't signal that she was awake. The horror of it settled over the room like a shroud. This was the kind of medical nightmare that destroyed lives, not through death, but through the memory of unbearable suffering. But you said she doesn't remember. The anesthesiologist realized what was happening. Gave her an emergency dose of something, propofol maybe, or midazolam, enough to cause retrograde amnesia. By the time she fully woke up in recovery, the memory was gone, chemically erased. I wrote carefully, patient describing trauma event, but emotional affect doesn't align with narrative. Something missing. That must have been terrifying to learn, I said. But David, that wasn't your fault. Medical errors happen. Why would you think she would tell them what you'd done? You weren't even in the operating room. His laugh was bitter, hollow. No, I wasn't in the operating room. And there it was, the hairline fracture in his facade. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining a posture of openness while every instinct sharpened to attention. Where were you? The silence stretched until it felt intentional, almost punitive. Outside the window, the snow fell harder now, thick flakes blurring the world into something indistinct and distant. Somewhere deep within the hospital, a code was being called. I heard the announcement muffled through layers of concrete and glass, urgent, practiced, impersonal. Someone else's crisis, someone else's emergency. The building was full of them, stacked floor upon floor like boxes in a warehouse of human catastrophe. Pain organized by department, grief assigned a room number. I was in the parking garage, David said at last. His voice sounded hollow, as if it had traveled a long way to reach the room. In my car, with Jessica. The name landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. No echo, just a sudden spreading disturbance. Jessica is, I prompted gently, already sensing the answer. My colleague, he said, then corrected himself, was my colleague. He dragged a hand down his face, leaving faint red scratches along his cheek, as though he were trying to erase himself. We'd been having an affair for 8 months. The words came more easily now, as if once spoken, they demanded to be finished. That day, he continued, staring at the floor, while Sarah was having her surgery, Jessica and I were together. He shook his head slowly, disbelief edging into his voice. I told Sarah I'd be in the waiting room. I said I'd be right there if she needed me. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but wasn't. But I wasn't, he said quietly. I was 2 floors below, in a parking garage, sitting in my car, doing that. His jaw tightened, while my wife was being cut open. The room seemed to absorb the confession, thickening with it. Some truths don't explode when they're spoken. They sink. They settle into everything, contaminating the air. And as David stood there, stripped of pretense at last, I understood why his mind had been unraveling since August 15th. Some betrayals don't end when the act is over. They begin there. The pieces began assembling themselves into a picture I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't about medical trauma. It was about guilt, about the savage mathematics of coincidence and consequence. The surgeon couldn't reach me, he continued, voice mechanical now, as if he'd rehearsed this confession 1,000 times in his mind. They called my cell 6 times. I had it on silent. When I finally checked it and saw the missed calls, Do you know what my first thought was, Dr. Moore? Not concerned for Sarah. My first thought was that someone had seen us, that we'd been caught. He sat back down, deflated. The confession had taken something from him, some vital force that had been keeping him upright. I drove to the hospital in a panic. When Dr. Chen told me what happened, all I could think was that this was punishment. Cosmic fucking justice. My wife suffering alone, trapped in her own body, while I was... He couldn't finish. But she doesn't remember, I said gently. She doesn't remember the pain, but I remember. Every single day for 6 months, I remember what she doesn't. And I can't tell her, because if I tell her why I wasn't there, why they couldn't reach me, it would hurt her more than the surgery ever did. So I lie. I lie about everything. About us being happy, about planning trips to Italy, about her recovery being smooth. I lie because the truth would destroy her, and isn't that what we're supposed to do? Protect the people we love? The question was genuine. A desperate plea for absolution from someone who had already convicted himself. You're asking the wrong question, I said. The question isn't whether lying protects her. The question is whether it's destroying you. David's hands trembled. I ended things with Jessica the next day. I've been the perfect husband since. Attentive, present, devoted. But every time Sarah smiles at me, every time she says she loves me, I feel like I'm committing the crime all over again. Because she loves someone who doesn't exist. She loves the man she thinks I am. I set down my pen. This was the moment, the fulcrum point where a patient either breaks through to healing or retreats further into their constructed reality. You came to therapy because you're suffocating under the weight of this secret. Part of you wants to confess. Part of you believes you deserve to suffer. You've created an entire architecture of lies not to protect Sarah, but to maintain your own self-image as a good person who made one mistake. I am a good person who made one mistake, he said, but the conviction was gone from his voice. No, David, you're a complicated person who made a choice and then made another choice and another. Every day for 6 months, you've chosen to live in a fiction, not for Sarah's sake, for yours. The words hit him like physical blows. I watched as years of carefully maintained denial crumbled, his face contorted, not with anger, but with the raw, ugly pain of self-recognition. What do I do? He whispered. It's the question every patient eventually asks, no matter how they arrive in the room or how carefully they try to avoid it. They come looking for answers, for absolution, for something clean and clinical they can take with them, a diagnosis, a label, a magic prescription that will make the pain disappear and return their lives to a manageable shape. They want relief without reckoning, but therapy was never meant to be an eraser. It doesn't rewrite what happened or grant immunity from consequence. It doesn't lift the weight off your chest and promise you'll never feel it again. Pain isn't a malfunction to be corrected. It's a signal, a record, proof that something mattered and something broke. What therapy offers instead is far less comforting and far more difficult. It teaches you how to carry the pain without letting it hollow you out, how to sit with it without turning it into self-destruction, how to stop running from it long enough to understand what it's asking of you. Healing isn't about feeling nothing. It's about learning how to live with what you feel and choosing day after day not to let it ruin you. You make a choice, I said. You can continue living in the fiction, but understand that it will slowly poison everything genuine in your life. Or you can find a way to integrate what happened, not by confessing to Sarah necessarily, but by forgiving yourself enough to exist authentically in your own life. I don't deserve forgiveness. That's not for you to decide. Your job isn't to punish yourself forever. Your job is to decide what kind of person you want to be from this moment forward. David sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world beyond my window looked clean, transformed. A temporary illusion before the dirt and slush returned. Finally, he looked up. I don't know if I can do this. You've been doing it for 6 months already, I pointed out. You've been surviving. Now you need to learn how to live. He nodded slowly, exhausted. As he stood to leave, I noticed something different. His hand moved to his wedding ring, but instead of scratching it, he simply touched it. Gently, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than anxiety. Same time next week? He asked. Same time next week. After he left, the room felt suddenly larger, emptier, as if his absence had created a vacuum the darkness was eager to fill. I stayed where I was, letting the silence settle, watching the last of the daylight drain from the window until the glass reflected nothing back at me. This was the hour I knew well, the space after the door closes when the work doesn't end so much as it changes form. I did what I always do after difficult sessions. I replayed the conversation in my mind, not as it happened, but as it could have happened. I examined each exchange for missed openings, moments where I might have pressed harder or pulled back sooner. I listened again for the subtle hesitations in his voice, the words he chose too carefully, the ones he avoided altogether. I wondered whether a different question, asked a different way, might have led us somewhere deeper or somewhere safer. This kind of review isn't indulgence, it's discipline. Therapists learn early that insight often arrives late when the room is empty and the patient is gone. We dissect our own responses as carefully as we analyze theirs, searching for clarity in the residue of the session. But that night, the exercise felt heavier than usual. Some conversations don't stay contained within the hour. They linger, unresolved, pressing against the edges of thought. And as the darkness thickened around me, I couldn't shake the sense that something essential had been said, and something far more important had not. But mostly, I thought about the nature of truth and the lies we tell ourselves. David believed he was protecting Sarah by maintaining his fiction. But perhaps the real fiction was simpler, that any of us are the heroes of our own stories. We're all unreliable narrators of our own lives. We edit, revise, omit the scenes that don't align with our self-concept. And sometimes, in the quiet darkness of a psychiatrist's office, we finally allow ourselves to read the unedited version. I pulled out David's file, made my notes. Then I closed it and placed it in the drawer with all the others. Hundreds of files, hundreds of secrets, the accumulated weight of human failure and resilience filed alphabetically between A and Z. Tomorrow, someone else would sit in that leather chair. They would tell me their version of truth wrapped in whatever lies they needed to survive. And I would listen, as I always do, knowing that somewhere, between their story and reality, lies the path to healing, if they're brave enough to walk it.